Now the Quran has given for the Muslims a criterion. It is evil to kill another person unjustly, and a person is taken into account for that and killed. In relation to the big picture, we do not know, and we can't make an eternal judgment. We can only make a temporal judgment. We do not know. In other words, if somebody murders another person, and by all outward appearances it was an unjustly murder, that person is taken into account and his life is forfeited. Or in certain circumstances, what are called the wulat ad-dam can forgive him. Islam has an interesting attitude towards the death penalty. The Muslims allow for a family to forgive the person. So you can't, the Christian ideal of forgiving, and the Quran actually says to forgive is higher. So if a person killed another person, the family has the right to say they forgive them. Right? They can do that. But in terms of highway robbery, brigandry, there's no. That's anybody that threatens the security of a society. In other words, indiscriminate. So if there was a fight between two people and one person killed the other person, then the family could say, we don't want to take him to account for it. We're going to forgive him. They can do that. But if it's somebody who goes in and robs a store and kills somebody, then they forfeited their life by Islamic law.
Explain the concept of fatwa.
A fatwa?
And this,
like Salman Rushdie?
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, a fatwa is not a death a fatwa is not a death penalty. It's a legal opinion. It's not binding either. In other words, technically by Islamic law, a person can give a legal opinion. Like I can give an opinion. You can come to me if I'm a faqih, a jurisprudent. You say, what's the punishment for somebody that curses the Prophet Muhammad? And you say, death. Right? So then I say, well, Salman Rushdie cursed him. Well, although that book is, what do they call it in literature? Roman à clef? Is that what it is? Who's a... Roman à clef? Is that what they call it? Yeah. Is that what they call it? Does anyone know the literary term? There's a term for something where you hide a historical or a factual thing within a literary. I think it's Roman à clef. I'm not sure though. Anyway, somebody can say, well, he slandered the Prophet Muhammad. Salman Rushdie would say, look, this is a piece of fiction. By Islamic law, that was completely unacceptable. In other words, you have to take people to trial. You can't just kill somebody. Muslims we're not vigilantes. There's actually a procedure. And apostasy has, what's that?
I said you have a difference with the Rushdie. It was clearly an example of the difference between the sacred and the profane.
That's one way of looking at it, yeah. I mean, I think, the modern West, I think Norman Mailer actually during that time said, heresy has made us free, long live heresy. In other words, there are a lot of people in the West that see heresy as a good thing. And it's interesting, this gets to this whole idea, because heresy in Greek, eretikos, means to choose for yourself. It's what they call the middle voice in Greek, the verb, heren, which is to choose for oneself. So I choose my own way. I'm not going to choose, the way religion tells me or the way God tells me or the way. I choose my own way. And that is the original meaning of a heretic. Somebody who chose their own way, who did not submit to. And in the West, we certainly have a tradition now, a post-Enlightenment tradition, which is really, we don't have to be subservient and submissive to a church or to some doctrinal authority, some dogma. That the individual should have a right to choose what they believe, to choose how they want to worship, or how they don't want to worship, right? So that's very strong, I think, in modern Western tradition. And a lot of it is a reaction to the abuses of the church during the Middle Ages and the burning of heretics and things like that. There was a lot of that went on. Now, in the Islamic tradition, traditionally, heresy, there are laws of apostasy. I think they're a lot more difficult to prove, but there is a procedure. You cannot simply condemn somebody as a heretic in Islamic law. They have to be brought to trial. The intention has to be looked at. Do you see? So, but that's a case where, politics is being used within a religious context. I really...
The Iranian case.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, because the Egyptians had a whole different reaction to it. Like the Azhar, they had a different reaction. So, here was a case where, because I'll tell you something about Muslims. Muslims take the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ very seriously. They really do. And it's interesting that the Iranians also condemned the Greek author who wrote the Last Temptation of Christ. They also condemned him as disparaging a prophet, but that didn't make news. Do you see what I mean? So they were just across the board. You make fun of prophets, you're asking for trouble from us. That was their idea. Now that was true. There's still laws on the books in England, apostasy laws. There are laws in England, but they did not relate to the Islamic religion, right? They relate to the Christian religion. So technically there are still in certain countries, there are laws against, like in Greece and other places, there are laws against making fun of prophets, disparaging prophets, things like that. So a fatwa is just a legal opinion, and it's non-binding. It is non-binding.
Killed, what's his name, Rushdie. Is it justifiable? I mean, he seems to fear for his life.
If Rushdie was in a Muslim country and he did disparage the Prophet, that by Islamic law, if he is tried and found to be guilty, that the punishment is death. That is a punishment for any prophet, Abraham, Moses, any of the prophets, not just the Prophet Muhammad.
He just has to stay out of Muslim country, he's okay?
No, I don't think so. Because I think the Iranians have, they offered a reward and things like that. So I think, he does fear for his life. Personally, I'm not going to go out and hunt down Rushdie and things like that. It's not my business. My understanding of Islamic law is that it's not a vigilante law. I can't take the law in my own hands. Because that leads to anarchy. Think about this societally. If I'm with some guy in private and I steal all his money, blow him away, and then I tell the judge, well, he cursed the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Good alibi, right? If you start thinking about it, it's crazy. You can't just, I'll give you an example. In Islamic law, if a man finds his wife in bed with another man, he cannot kill her. Absolutely not. He has to have 4 witnesses that see penetration. Pretty impossible, right? And I think you have to be pretty perverse to, go into a room and try to, see that. If people are under covers, you can't do it, not just on top of one another. Seriously. And if the only thing he has recourse to is if he does find that, immediately he has to do what's called mula'na, which is where he goes to a qadi, he says, I found my wife in bed, and then the wife is brought, and they do what's called mula'na, which is a mutual cursing. Each one swears that the other is lying, and on the 5th time they call the curse of Allah on them. If she does that, then she is absolved, but there's a permanent divorce, and the child does not go to his lineage. The child is not considered his child, right? If she doesn't, then she would be guilty of adultery. No, because it's related to lineage. That's the only reason. It's related to lineage. In other words, Islam is a patrilineal teaching. So it's one of the 5 things, and I didn't go into this, but it's very interesting.